Hey there, sleuths. Welcome to the Detective's Den, your one-stop spot for unpacking mysteries, cracking cases, and diving deep into the unknown. I'm your name, and I'll be your guide on this investigative journey. Globe showing Europe, Africa. Now tell me, from which corner of the globe are you tuning in today? Drop your location in the comments below. Let's see just how far our detective network reaches. Chapter 1, The Invitation. A crisp knock at the door roused Hercule Poirot from his reverie. He sat in his modest London flat, an immaculately kept apartment on Montague Street, its walls adorned with tapestries and a small collection of Dutch paintings. The late afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains, casting filigreed shadows across his polished mahogany desk, where his famed little grey cells rested lightly upon a sheaf of correspondence. He opened the door to find a uniformed messenger, bearing an envelope of delicate ivory laid with a seal of deep cobalt wax. Madame la Baronne, the messenger intoned with polite deference, though Poirot knew better. Lady Marion Beaufort styled herself simply as Lady, not Baroness. He signed the ledger with his characteristic precision, small, neat strokes of penmanship, then took possession of the letter, turning it over in his gloved hands. The handwriting was fluid and elegant, copperplate script that spoke of an education refined and a temperament accustomed to society's finer pleasures. Inside, the paper was smooth, almost silky to the touch. Poirot unfolded it gingerly, as one might handle a rare butterfly. The message read, "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I implore your assistance in a matter of utmost delicacy. A family heirloom of great sentimental value, a sapphire brooch set in platinum, has vanished under inexplicable circumstances from my private collection. I trust entirely in your discretion and unparalleled skill. Might you oblige me by attending Amberley Manor as soon as possible? Respectfully yours, Marion Beaufort." Poirot paused, considering each word as though he might detect hidden meaning in the ink itself. A vanished heirloom was not an uncommon affair in the world of polite society, but the tone of genuine distress, tempered by a certain veneer of composure, intrigued him immensely. He murmured to himself, one affair delicate, indeed. He arranged his cravat, straightened his frock coat, and, with the speed of a tightly wound clockwork mechanism, prepared for departure. He packed methodically, a pair of extra shirts, perfectly starched and folded, several handkerchiefs each containing a delicate scent of bergamot, his magnifying glass, polished to a high gleam, and a small notebook in which to record the slightest of observations. He ensured his moustache was immaculately groomed, each hair aligned in precise symmetry, and applied a faint whisper of eau de cologne. With a final flourish, he tucked the invitation letter into his inner pocket, where it lay like a secret promise. By 8:15 the next morning, Poirot was aboard the Brighton Express, seated in a first-class carriage whose plush seats and polished brass fittings offered him both comfort and the perfect vantage. Outside, the cityscape of London gave way to verdant fields and flocks of sheep grazing contentedly on rolling downs. Poirot observed through the window with his keen, dark eyes, the careful way the farmer tended his flock, the neat hedgerows that divided one field from another, the distant spire of a parochial church rising above a cluster of elm trees. Not a single detail escaped him, from the slight tremor of a branch in the breeze to the glint of sunlight on a curious bird's wing. During the journey, Poirot reviewed Lady Marion's letter once more, this time focusing on the choice of words. Great sentimental value suggested a deep emotional tie beyond mere monetary worth. Private collection implied a room or cabinet accessible only to those in intimate confidence. And the phrase, "the greatest discretion," that bespoke scandal, perhaps even within the family itself. A brooch missing from a public display might be theft, but from a private chamber, it could denote betrayal. At Chichester Station, Poirot descended onto the platform, his polished boots striking the wooden boards in measured taps. A black carriage awaited him, its liveried driver bowing low. The ride to Amberley Manor carried them along winding lanes lined with elderflower trees, their creamy blossoms perfuming the air. A fine mist hovered over the fields, imparting an air of ethereal calm. Yet Poirot, attentive as ever, noted the broken shutter on a distant cottage window, the footprints in a muddy track, and a curious cluster of violet petals caught against the carriage step, a detail he filed away without comment. Amberley Manor came into view over a gentle rise, a stately mansion of warm brick, half hidden beneath ancient wisteria vines. Its mullioned windows glinted like watchful eyes, and the tall chimneys stood as silent sentinels against the pale sky. The iron gate creaked as the carriage approached, and Poirot's keen gaze surveyed the avenue of chestnut trees that formed a cathedral of green above him. He was received at the great oaken doors by Lady Marian herself. She was slender, with a stature at once regal and fragile. Her gown, of soft dove-grey silk, draped her figure with effortless elegance. The faintest tremor quivered at her lips as she curtsied. "Monsieur Poirot," she intoned in a voice pitched between relief and apprehension. "I thank you for coming so promptly." "And mon plaisir, milady," replied Poirot, bowing with graceful formality. He perceived the faintest quiver in her gloved hand as she offered to escort him into the heart of the manor. "Please show me to the room in question," he said, producing his notebook. "I shall require only a moment to apprehend the truth." They entered a long corridor lined with ancestral portraits, stern forebears gazing down through painted eyes of oil and canvas. At the far end lay the doors of Lady Marian's private salon. Here, the atmosphere changed. It was a sanctuary of feminine taste, cushioned chairs upholstered in pale brocade, cabinets of curiosities gleaming with porcelain and bronze. In the center, under a domed glass case, stood the empty plinth on which the sapphire brooch should have rested. Poirot's gaze fixed upon it like a surgeon examining a wound. He approached with deliberate calm. On the plinth, a faint smudge marred the polished surface, an impression of slender fingertips. He held his loupe over the mark and noted the ridge pattern, then tapped his chin thoughtfully. Someone removed the brooch with meticulous care, he mused aloud, but was in haste to depart, leaving behind a trace of humanity. He jotted down the observation in his notebook, finger-smudged glass dome. Lady Marian glanced anxiously at him. "Do you think?" "Mademoiselle," he corrected gently, "we must avoid presumption until the facts present themselves. But rest assured, your precious heirloom shall be recovered." He turned to survey the room in its entirety. The windows were closed, the heavy velvet drapes drawn halfway. No sign of forced entry. The small writing desk held a scattering of letters. Upon one lay a fresh seal impression, her personal monogram. On the chaise longue, an abandoned glove hinted at a recent visitor. And upon the ornate rug at their feet, a single rose petal, pale as moonlight, lay incongruously among the intricate pattern. Poirot pocketed the petal with gloved fingers, adding a new line in his notes, "Single pale rose petal on rug." He stepped back, drawing in a full breath. "I believe, madam," he said, with a small smile, "that in time, these humble tokens shall guide me to the culprit." As evening settled, Lady Marian pressed tea upon him in a fine porcelain cup. Poirot accepted with refined grace, though his dark eyes remained alert, noticing the slight tremor of her hand as she poured, the subdued glances exchanged between the household staff, and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock, each element part of a delicate tapestry of truth. By the time candlelight danced upon the walls, Poirot had laid the groundwork for his investigation. He sipped his tea, content, for he knew that every mystery, no matter how confounding, succumbed to the methodical application of logic, observation, and that little spark of psychology he wielded so deftly. And so, with the night drawing in around Amberley Manor, the stage was set for the drama to unfold. The invitation had been accepted, the pieces in motion, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work. Chapter 2, Through the Manor Gates. The following morning dawned grey and cool, a thin mist weaved among the rolling meadows as Hercule Poirot stepped from the carriage onto the gravel forecourt of Amberley Manor. He adjusted his bowler hat against a whisper of wind, smoothed his immaculate overcoat, and took in the facade of the house with a practiced eye. The red brick walls were softened by climbing ivy, stone mullions framed tall windows that glowed like watchful eyes, and a wide portico, supported by slender columns, sheltered the great oaken doors. Despite its outward charm, Poirot sensed an undercurrent of tension, a hush among the breadths of the yew hedges. As the coachman lifted his hat and the carriage rolled away, Poirot was greeted by Sinclair, the butler, a tall, austere man with silvered hair neatly parted, whose posture bespoke both authority and reserve. "Monsieur Poirot," he inquired in clipped tones, offering his gloved hand. Poirot accepted it with a gentle nod. "Indeed." "Good morning, Sinclair. Pray direct me to Lady Marian's drawing-room. I should like to speak with her at once." Sinclair inclined his head, lips compressed in a thin line. "Right this way, sir." He led Poirot along a polished oak corridor, the walls adorned with hunting trophies and sepia-toned sketches of distant relatives. Poirot noted the precision of Sinclair's stride, the discreet gleam of his silver waist chain, and the faint scuff on the left heel of his right shoe, details that, while trivial in isolation, might reveal far more when placed in context. At the end of the corridor stood a pair of gilded doors. Beyond them lay the drawing-room, a spacious chamber of pale green damask and English walnut. A crackling fire glowed in the hearth, casting golden highlights on the polished surfaces. Over the mantelpiece stood a grand clock, its face framed by cherubs, ticking with dignified solemnity. Plush chairs and settees were arranged in intimate alcoves, and a silver tea service gleamed on a side table. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and old paper. Lady Marian awaited him near a tall window that overlooked the gardens. She wore a tailored afternoon dress of dove grey, its high collar embroidered with pearls, and a delicate locket at her throat. Though she managed a gracious smile, her eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. As Poirot entered, she curtsied with a polite tremor. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice soft yet earnest. "Allow me to thank you again for coming. The household is unsettled, to say the least." "Madam," he replied, bowing with refined courtesy, "I trust that with a clear head and calm reflection, we shall find resolution. But first, if you would be so kind as to recount, in your own words, precisely what transpired on the evening the brooch vanished." Lady Marian led him to a wing-back chair beside the window and produced a small notebook. "It was 3 nights ago," she said, consulting her diary. "After dinner, I retired to my private salon to examine these newly arrived letters from Paris. I placed the sapphire brooch within its glass dome and stepped out for a moment to greet my guests in the dining room. When I returned, less than 5 minutes later, the display case was empty." Poirot made a neat entry in his own notebook, interval, max 5 minutes. Location, private salon. Witnesses, none. He looked up. "Did you hear any sound? A footstep perhaps, or the click of a latch?" Lady Marian arched a pale eyebrow. "Nothing, monsieur." The house was notably quiet. Even the staff seemed hushed. She frowned. "But I did notice, as I passed the corridor, a slight odor of lilac, almost overpowering, though I have no such flowers in my gardens." Poirot's eyes lit at the mention. "Lilac, you say?" He tapped his pen against the page. "Very curious. And what of the staff? Have you observed anyone behaving oddly since?" She hesitated. "Sinclair has been as formal as ever. Our footman, Thomas, appears unusually pale. And Miss Cecilia Harcourt, my cousin, has been distant. But she is apt to melancholy at the best of times." She closed her notebook with a decisive snap. "I fear I am not much help." "Far from it, madam. Every detail is a thread we may follow." Poirot rose and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. "Pray, may I see the house from the outside? A detective must know the terrain." Lady Marian rose, smoothing her dress. Sinclair appeared at the door, his expression unreadable. "Shall I prepare the motor car, madam?" "No, thank you, Sinclair. Monsieur Poirot and I shall walk." She offered Poirot her gloved arm. Together, they stepped into the morning chill. The grounds were laid out in formal English fashion, clipped hedges framed gravel paths, rose beds bloomed in precise symmetry, and an ancient utopia stood sentinel near a stone sundial. Sinclair remained on the steps to receive visitors. The cook and housemaids, disinfecting spoons under the servants' wing, peered curiously from behind partially opened doors. Poirot paused by the sundial. "Madam, you have noted no forced entry?" "None," Lady Marian repeated. The windows were latched, the door locked as usual. Poirot circled the salon window, inspecting the stone sill and the metal catch. He knelt to examine the gravel below, brushing aside a fallen leaf to reveal a single petal of deep purple, a contradiction to the pale rose petal he had found inside. He bagged it carefully. These petals, one pale, one deep, originated from different flowers. Yet neither grows here. I believe someone brought them to distract us. Distract us? Lady Marian's breath caught. Yes. The perpetrator wished our attention drawn to floral nonsense while the true act went unnoticed. Poirot rose and brushed imaginary dust from his lapels. "Madam, I shall require time to question each member of the household. Might we convene this afternoon in the library?" "Of course," she agreed, though a flicker of concern crossed her face. "I fear my family and staff are already on edge." "Excellent," Poirot said. "Nerves will unravel the truth more swiftly than any confession." Back inside the house, Poirot requested the presence of Sinclair and Thomas, the footman. He stood in the corridor just outside the drawing room, the morning light slanting across his profile like a portrait in monochrome. Sinclair appeared first, immaculate in livery, face as smooth as porcelain. Poirot observed the butler's precise breathing, the alignment of his cuffs, and the cool steadiness of his gaze. "Sinclair," Poirot began, in his gentle French accent, "you have served Amberley Manor for many years." "Over 30, sir," Sinclair replied, voice measured. "Your loyalty is beyond question, I am sure. Yet loyalty does not preclude curiosity. Tell me, did you notice anything amiss that night, any comings or goings?" Sinclair's expression did not waver. "Only that the household was more somnolent than usual, sir. Many lingered in the dining room over port, none ventured by the salon corridor." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And the pockets of the staff, were they searched?" Sinclair hesitated, just a fraction, before answering. "I would have found no reason. The brooch was assumed misplaced, not stolen." He paused, then added, "Thomas, the footman, did seem ill, sir." At that moment, Thomas appeared, pale and tremulous. Poirot directed him to stand beside Sinclair. In the narrow corridor light, Poirot compared the two, Sinclair tall and composed, Thomas slight and anxious, his cheeks ashen. Poirot smiled. "Gentlemen, I thank you. That will suffice for now." After they bowed and withdrew, Poirot returned to the drawing room. Lady Marian greeted him with a fresh cup of tea. "And how do you find the staff, monsieur?" "Each a piece in a puzzle, madam," Poirot replied, settling into a chair. "Some pieces may be missing, and others placed to mislead. But the complete picture will emerge." He sipped his tea, noting the faint sweetness of bergamot. Outside, the mist had lifted, revealing a green expanse dotted with sheep grazing drowsily. Inside, the crackle of the log fire punctuated the hush. Poirot's little grey cells were already sorting through the threads, the petals of two flowers, the lilac scent, the broken silence of the night. Each clue alone was but a whisper, together they would speak the truth. And so, as the grandfather clock chimed 11, Poirot rose once more. "Madam, I shall retire briefly to gather my thoughts. This afternoon, we shall meet in the library." He bowed and departed, leaving Lady Marian to watch him go, hope and fear mingling in her expressive eyes. In that moment, The great house, with all its secrets and scandals, waited in suspended breath. Through its corridors and salons, the detective trod, assembling a tapestry of fact from threads of illusion, and soon, Amberley Manor's quiet facade would be shattered by the revelation of its hidden truths. Chapter 3, The First Clue. That evening, a fine chill had fallen upon Amberley Manor. The sun dipped below the Sussex Downs, casting long, auburn shadows across the manicured lawns, and the great windows glowed with warm lamplight as Lady Marian entertained her guests in the dining room. Poirot took his place at the table, an unobtrusive presence in his charcoal suit and immaculate cravat, while the other diners clustered in whispered conversation. Lady Marian's cousin, Miss Cecilia Harcourt, austere and elegantly dressed, the neighbouring vicar, Reverend Smythe, the neighbouring landowner, Sir Reginald Pembroke, and Edward Beaufort, Lady Marian's nephew, whose eyes flicked with an unmistakable restlessness. The meal proceeded with the polite formalities expected of genteel society, consommé served in porcelain bowls, venison with rich juniper sauce, and petits fours presented on silver trays. Conversation turned to the harvest and the upcoming county fete, yet under the veneer of cordiality lay a current of tension. Edward pushed his peas about his plate, Miss Harcourt's gaze remained fixed, thoughtful, upon the fireplace, and the vicar coughed discreetly whenever the subject drifted to the missing brooch. Poirot sipped his champagne and observed. His little grey cells noted the tremor of Edward's hand as he raised his glass, the slight crease in Miss Harcourt's brow, and the vicar's restless foot tapping. When the conversation lulled, Poirot leaned slightly toward Edward and remarked, in gentle French-accented English, "Monsieur Beaufort, you are master of Amberley's lands in your own right. Have you any particular interest in your aunt's heirloom?" Edward started, then recovered with a forced, polite smile. "Interest? Oh, indeed. It is a beautiful piece. But I trust it will turn up soon enough." He ran his thumb along the rim of his wineglass, tracing the pattern of cut crystal. Poirot's gaze followed the motion, registering the young man's anxious hesitation. By dessert, strawberries Romanov accompanied by a light Armagnac, Poirot excused himself, murmuring that he wished to inspect the scene of the crime once more. Lady Marian gave a hurried nod of approval, and Sinclair, with discreet efficiency, rose to guide him through the shadowed corridors toward the private salon. The corridor was quiet, illuminated only by the flicker of wall-mounted sconces. The thick carpet muffled their footsteps as they passed door after door, each labelled the library, the study, the morning room, until they reached the salon. Sinclair paused respectfully at the threshold. "Monsieur Poirot," he whispered, "the household maintains that no one has entered here since Lady Marian's discovery, yet." He trailed off, but Poirot needed no further encouragement. Entering the salon, the detective closed the door softly behind him. The room was as he had left it, pale green walls adorned with family portraits, a chaise longue draped with a shawl, and the empty glass dome upon its plinth. The single finger smudge on the dome still gleamed in the lamplight like a clue framed by shadows. Poirot withdrew his magnifying glass and approached the case. He examined the smudge closely, noting the pattern of ridges and the slight stray oil deposit at its center. An adult's fingertip, he commented to himself, yet nervous in execution. He tapped the glass gently, listening for any hollow resonance, then turned his attention to the floor. At his feet lay the Persian rug, its intricate pattern of florals and vines carpeting the room in deep reds and golds. Poirot crouched to inspect the fibers. There, caught among the loops of wool, was a solitary thread of green silk. He plucked it with tweezers and held it up to the light. It was not of any substance found in the household. The plantation down the hill produced only woolen threads, and the Manor's seamstress had never worked with silk in such a shade. Sinclair cleared his throat. "Shall I take that, sir?" Poirot slipped the thread into a small evidence envelope. "Thank you, Sinclair. Please ensure it remains secure." He rose and lit a cigarette, exhaling a thin plume of smoke that curled toward the gilded ceiling. The lingering scent mixed with the faint aroma of lilac that still clung to the air, a perfume entirely out of place in this English country home. Sinclair frowned. You detected it again, monsieur. A subtle fragrance, Poirot admitted, distinctly floral. Yet neither the gardens nor Lady Marian's sitting room contain lilac. I suspect the scent was deliberately introduced to misdirect. He crushed the cigarette stub in the ashtray and took a measured breath. The question is, who would employ such a ruse, and to what end? Sinclair's eyes flicked to the window, beyond which a sliver of moon shone through trembling branches. Perhaps one of the guests, sir? Perhaps, Poirot murmured, though the scent was present before the arrival of most guests. But that matter may wait. He returned a magnifying glass to his coat pocket. I think there is more to be learned from Monsieur Beaufort's own words. He nodded to Sinclair. Show me to the gentlemen's rooms, if you please. Soon they found themselves outside Edward's chambers at the end of another corridor. Sinclair rapped politely on the door. Edward answered, looking startled to see them so late. His hair appeared tousled, and his tie was slightly off-center, a sign, Poirot noted, of agitation. Monsieur Beaufort, Poirot began, entering with courteous permission, I wonder if you might indulge me with a few moments' conversation. Edward nodded and closed the door. Inside, the room was plainly furnished, a writing desk piled with letters, a single bed with a neat coverlet, and a chair by the window overlooking the gardens. Poirot seated himself deliberately, folding his hands across his lap. You will forgive my directness, he said, but a family heirloom has been taken, and subtle clues suggest a calculated plan. Might I inquire about your movements that evening? Edward swallowed and ran a hand through his hair. I was in the billiard room until just before dinner, he stammered. Then I went to the drawing room to join the others. I never left again. Indeed? Poirot's eyes narrowed with polite curiosity. And did you notice the indistinct aroma of lilac in the corridor? Edward's brow creased. Lilac? Yes, perhaps. I didn't think much of it. I simply presumed some lady guest carried a bouquet. Poirot inclined his head. A reasonable presumption. Yet none of the female guests carry such a fragrance. Furthermore, I discovered a thread of green silk beneath the display case, thread which does not correspond to Lady Marian's attire. He paused, watching Edward closely. Might you know of anyone in this house who employs green silk? Edward's throat bobbed as he swallowed. No one, monsieur. He glanced toward the window, as though tempted to bolt. I have no interest in these distractions. Poirot allowed a moment's silence to take hold in the room. Then he spoke gently, you will pardon my frankness, but I sense unease. If you were in the salon when the brooch was taken, and wished to avoid suspicion, you might have introduced the lilac scent to deflect attention. He leaned forward. But the green thread is harder to explain, is it not? Unless, perhaps, it fell from a garment you wore. Edward's face flushed crimson. He looked away, then back at Poirot. I told you, I was in the drawing room. I had on my dinner jacket, it is dark, not green. True, Poirot agreed softly. But the lining of your overcoat, perhaps. Something you removed and draped over the chair. He paused, allowing the suggestion to sink in. Edward's lips trembled. For a moment, it seemed the young man would break. Then, with a final effort, he regained composure. Monsieur Poirot, he said quietly, I swear I had nothing to do with that brooch. My aunt needs it, more than I do. Poirot leaned back, smoothing his moustache. I believe you, Monsieur Beaufort. But the truth is often veiled by sincere protestations. He tapped the envelope containing the thread. Rest assured, I shall continue my inquiries. For now, I thank you for your candor. Rising, he excused himself. Edward remained seated, head bowed, as Poirot and Sinclair left the room. In the corridor, the detective paused once more to breathe in the corridor-scented air. Then, tipping his head towards Sinclair, he said quietly, "We have our first substantial clues, lilac fragrance and green silk thread. Both appear deliberate, and both will lead us closer to the truth." As the door clicked shut behind them, Poirot's mind whirred with possibilities. The game was afoot, the first pieces in place. Somewhere in the depths of Amberley Manor, the thief stirred, unaware that each subtle evidence only sharpened Poirot's resolve. And so the methodical pursuit of truth pressed on, guided by the detective's unwavering eye for detail and the steady march of his little grey cells. Chapter 4: The Red Herring. By the fourth morning at Amberley Manor, tension had permeated every corridor and corner. A hush fell over breakfast, as though even the clatter of teaspoons might shatter an invisible glass. Lady Marian sat at the head of the table, her usually composed features drawn with worry. Beside her, Miss Cecilia Harcourt toyed with her toast, never lifting her gaze, while Edward Beaufort fidgeted restlessly, absently stroking the cuff of his sleeve. Sinclair hovered behind the silver tea urn, eyes vigilant, ready to serve yet unwilling to speak. Poirot surveyed the scene with calm detachment. He broke his fast with impeccable manners, soft-boiled eggs, buttered toast, and a modest cup of Darjeeling, yet all the while his little grey cells were at work, assembling fragments of truth. The scent of lilac still lingered faintly in Lady Marian's corridors, though the gardener had sworn no such blossoms grew within a mile. And the green silk thread, as yet, awaited analysis back in London. But on this particular morning, fresh alarm seized the household, the disappearance of an 18th-century snuff box, equally precious, from its glass case in the library. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Lady Marian, her voice trembling as Sinclair relayed the news. "First the brooch, and now this. Why would anyone take the snuff box?" Sinclair pressed his lips together. "The case was found open when I made my early rounds, madam. The box itself, gold chased with the family crest, was gone, but no glass was broken. And there were no fingerprints on the case." "This is perplexing," Poirot murmured, rising from his seat. He smoothed his cravat and descended the dining-room steps. "Madam, if you would permit me, I shall attend to this matter at once." Lady Marian nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot." "I beg your pardon, everyone, please continue without me." The other guests exchanged uneasy glances. The vicar cleared his throat, Sir Reginald Pembroke hesitated over his marmalade, Miss Harcourt offered no comment, her expression inscrutable. Poirot, with Sinclair in attendance, made his way through the high-ceilinged corridors to the library, where the morning light slanted through stained glass windows, illuminating rows of leather-bound tomes and the polished surface of a mahogany reading table. The glass case housing the snuff box stood near the fireplace. Its dome had been lifted and set carefully aside on a side table, as if by someone accustomed to handling such objects. Poirot leaned in, inspecting the rim of the base. Perfectly clean, save for a minute scratch on the edge, and a faint smudge of residue on the wooden plinth. He tapped the glass dome lightly with his fingernail and listened for a hollow ring. "No sign of forced entry," he observed aloud. The thief knew precisely how to open this case. Sinclair stood by, respectfully silent. "I can produce the duplicate keys, sir," he offered. Poirot acknowledged the gesture with a nod, but his attention was already elsewhere. On the carpet beneath the display he discovered a single black hair, markedly different from the auburn tresses of Lady Marian or the dark braid of Miss Harcourt. He retrieved it with tweezers and placed it in a small envelope. "An unexpected find," he commented. "Curious that our thief should lose this as a calling card." "Black hair, monsieur," Sinclair managed. "But none of the family have hair so dark." "Precisely," Poirot agreed. "Which suggests someone outside the immediate household." He paced slowly to the armchair by the window and ran his fingers through his moustache. "And yet, someone with access. A visitor, perhaps, one of our guests, or even a tradesman called to the manor." He paused at the door. I shall require a list of everyone who entered the library in the past 24 hours, including servants and suppliers. Of course, Sinclair replied, bowing. I will prepare it immediately. Left alone, Poirot studied the library in its entirety, the embroidered curtains, the Persian rug that once bore a green thread, the card table in the corner, now devoid of pieces from the previous evening's game of whist, and the mantel clock, ticking with irrepressible calm. On the mantel, a porcelain vase held a handful of fresh flowers, lilac among them. Poirot's eyes narrowed. How convenient, he murmured. He lifted the vase and studied its contents, a cluster of pale pink roses, 2 stems of lilac, and a single sprig of wisteria. One does not ordinarily bring lilac indoors, unless to mask another scent, or to send a signal. He placed the vase back, careful to leave the stems in their original arrangement, then withdrew his notebook. By the time Sinclair returned with the requested list, 9 names in total, the Reverend Smythe, Sir Reginald, Edward Beaufort, Miss Harcourt, Lady Marian's Parisian dressmaker, Madame Leonide, the gardener's assistant, the stationer's delivery boy, the local apothecary's apprentice, and a specialist cabinet maker, Poirot had already begun to piece together his next move. He invited Sinclair to join him for tea in the library, ostensibly to discuss the guest list, but truly to observe the butler's reactions. As Sinclair poured, Poirot remarked casually, "Do you recall seeing Madame Leonide in this room, Sinclair?" The butler's perfect composure slipped for the barest instant. He paused over the china teapot, thumb resting mid-spout. "Madame Leonide called upon her mistress last evening, sir, but I did not see her enter the library." "And the apprentice from the apothecary?" Poirot continued, swirling his tea. "He delivered a case of remedies at dawn, then departed." Sinclair nodded. "Yes, monsieur." "And yet," Poirot said, leaning forward, "someone reintroduced lilac into this room after that delivery. Who, I wonder, could have brought both the flowers and the vinaigrette all that leaves such a scent?" He breathed in lightly. "There is, too, this hair, black and coarse, a clue that belongs to neither staff nor family." Sinclair set the cups aside and inclining his head, answered quietly, "I cannot imagine, sir." Poirot smiled thinly and rose. "Then our suspect is elusive. We must widen our net." He placed the hair and thread into separate envelopes, sealing them with a drop of wax. "Tonight, I shall question each guest and staff member privately. In the meantime, madam, if you would, please instruct your gardener to remove every bloom of lilac and wisteria from the house and grounds." Lady Marian, summoned to the library, looked aghast but obeyed without hesitation. "Of course," she said. "Anything that might distract the investigation." The fewer distractions, Poirot agreed, the clearer the path to the truth. He bowed and took his leave. That afternoon, as he retired to his room to gather his notes, a sudden commotion in the hall caught his attention. He hurried out to find Miss Harcourt standing before a maid, accusingly, of concealing a bouquet in her apron pocket. The maid wailed that it was merely a gift from the gardener, meant as a token of esteem. Miss Harcourt's eyes flashed with indignation. The butler stepped in, calm but firm, and recuperated the flowers. The household buzzed with speculation that Miss Harcourt bore some secret motive. Poirot observed from the stairwell, unseen, his little grey cells ticking. The confrontation might have been orchestrated to cast suspicion upon the cousin. Or it might have been genuine frustration at being under suspicion. Either way, he noted it all, the gardener's sheepish demeanor, the maid's trembling voice, Miss Harcourt's wounded pride. Each encounter wove another strand into his tapestry of the household's intricate relations. As dusk fell, the manor plunged into lamplit warmth. Guests drifted toward the drawing room, where a fire roared and a decanter of port beckoned. Edward lingered by the window, staring into the gathering gloom. The vicar muttered prayers beneath his breath. Sir Reginald examined the wings of the antique snuff-box case, now replaced with a replica. And Miss Harcourt paced by the piano, her reflection fractured by the window panes. Poirot emerged from the library with a small satchel containing his envelopes of evidence. He approached the circle of anxious faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight we must find the truth. I intend to question each of you, in turns and in privacy. Please retire to the drawing room. I shall see you in due course." One by one, the guests murmured assent and filed away, leaving Poirot and Sinclair alone beside the hearth. The butler inclined his head. "Shall I announce you, sir?" "Not yet," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "First, I must gather my thoughts. For in the quiet of this library lies the key to our mystery, a red herring we have chased, and clues we have yet to follow." He placed the hair, the thread, and the petals upon the table. Then, lighting his pipe, he sat back in the armchair, staring into the flames as though they might reveal the path ahead. Outside, the wind rasped against the windows, as if echoing the restless thoughts within. And somewhere in the shadows of Amberley Manor, the truth waited, poised to emerge from the tangle of suspicion, misdirection, and a detective's unerring eye for detail. Chapter 5, A Dangerous Turn. Late that afternoon, as violet shadows deepened across the lawns of Amberley Manor, a restless energy pulsed through its stately rooms. The guests drifted between the drawing room and conservatory, feigning calm but exchanging furtive glances. Poirot, summoned by Lady Marian, found her in the library, seated at her writing desk, her hand pressed lightly to her heart. "Monsieur Poirot," she breathed, "something dreadful has happened." He placed a steadying hand upon her arm. "Speak freely, madam." She looked up, pale as the roses clutched in her lap. "I was in the garden, gathering my wits after the snuff-box theft, when Sinclair called me, 'Madam, please hurry to the library.' I found Sinclair and Miss Cecilia Harcourt there. Edward was absent." Lady Marian swallowed. They had found a note, pinned to the bookcase, reading, "The second is for you." "I cannot bear to recall its message." Poirot's brow furrowed. "A warning, perhaps aimed at you, madam." "What, precisely, did it say?" She shivered. "Only those 5 words. No signature, no seal." "Very well." Poirot closed his notebook. "Remain here, if you will. I shall investigate." He strode from the room, his coat tail swishing. In the library's high-ceilinged gloom, Sinclair and Miss Harcourt stood before the empty place on the shelf where the 18th-century snuff-box once rested. A single sheet of cream-laid paper bore the neat copperplate inscription, "The second is for you." Beneath, a coal-black feather had been laid, its spine stiff and curved. "Sinclair," Poirot began quietly, "when did you discover this note?" "Shortly before I fetched madam, sir," Sinclair replied. "I arrived to present the afternoon tea trolley and found it pinned to the bookcase. Miss Harcourt and I did not touch it." "And you, Miss Harcourt, did you observe anything unusual?" Cecilia Harcourt's grey eyes flickered. "Only that the candles had guttered low, and the room was colder than usual. I thought it odd, but until this note," she trailed off. "Cold draught," Poirot nodded. "I shall note it." He stooped to peer at the feather. "Black plumage," he murmured. "Not from any common British fowl." He bagged it. "Thank you both. I shall return with further questions." By the time he reached the corridor, the household staff were gathering in anxious clusters. Whispers of curse, scandal, even murder, drifted from the kitchens. Poirot paused, inhaling deeply, letting each thought settle. Then he proceeded to the electrical panel in the servants' wing. The switch had been deliberately tripped, plunging the entire manor into sudden darkness. He pressed his palm to the iron lever. Not an accident. He pocketed a scrap of charred paper clinging to the switchboard. "I suspect our mischief-maker desires terror to distract us." Returning to the hall, he found Lady Marian poised at the foot of the grand staircase, eyes wide. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, my heart. She pressed her gloved hand to her chest and crumpled to the marble floor. Chaos erupted. Sinclair and the footman sprang forward, guests gasped and clustered in horror. Poirot knelt beside Lady Marian, loosening her collar to allow freer breathing. Her face was ashen, pulse fluttering. Sinclair produced smelling salts. Edward knelt at her side, face stricken with concern. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Help me carry her to the drawing room and lay her upon the settee. See to her comfort, and fetch Dr. Wainwright immediately. He sent the guests and staff scurrying with precise commands, then pressed his fingertips to Lady Marian's wrist. He felt her pulse racing, her breathing shallow. Moments later, the doctor dispatched proper sedatives and restorative cordials. Lady Marian lay restfully on the settee, eyes closed, an ivied porcelain bowl at her elbow. Poirot stood nearby, glancing at the cluster of onlookers, Edward, Miss Harcourt, Sinclair, Thomas the footman, and the vicar, all pale, all apprehensive. Dr. Wainwright offered a clinical nod. Nothing sinister medically, Hercule. Anxiety attack, likely induced by shock and the strain of these losses. Poirot inclined his head. Thank you, doctor. As the physician departed, Poirot let his gaze drift about the drawing room. Its opulent furnishings, the velvet settee, silken Persian rug, gilded mirror, felt suddenly oppressive, as though imbued with hidden menace. He turned to the assembled circle. Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen across these past days 2 thefts, a warning note, and a deliberate blackout. Tonight, Lady Marian suffered a fear-induced collapse. It is clear our culprit seeks to frighten and distract us. I propose we gather here, now, in the name of safety and clarity. Miss Harcourt swallowed. You wish us to remain in the drawing room? Precisely. No one must wander the halls unattended. Poirot's eyes paused on Edward. Nor venture near the library or salons, not until we know more. Edward nodded, voice tense. Very well. Poirot beckoned Sinclair forward. See that every door to the principal rooms is watched. No one in or out without my permission. Sinclair bowed, dispatching Thomas to post himself at the library threshold. Poirot then addressed the guests. I shall question each of you, one by one. Please return to your seats. Pray, no one speaks of their answers with others until all have been examined. The circle reformed, Edward seated at the fireplace, Miss Harcourt at the chaise longue, Sinclair standing near the door, the vicar and Sir Reginald framed by armchairs. Poirot took his accustomed place, centre stage, though he seemed, to the untrained eye, almost enraptured by the flutter of his own thoughts. He began with the vicar. Reverend Smythe, you have lived near Amberley for many years. Were you present in the house at the time of the blackout? The vicar's face creased in discomfort. I was in the conservatory with Sir Reginald, monsieur. We were admiring Lady Marian's orchids when the lights went out. Poirot inclined his head. And the feather? He held the specimen before the vicar's eyes. Do you recognize such a plume? The vicar's lip trembled. No, monsieur. I have no acquaintance with exotic birds. Very well. Poirot bagged the response. Then, turning to Sir Reginald, you said you were with the vicar. Did you see or hear anything unusual just before the blackout? Sir Reginald stroked his chin. Only that I heard footsteps overhead, as though someone paced the corridor. Poirot's eyes glinted. Which corridor? The landowner hesitated. The one outside Lady Marian's suite, I believe. Poirot tapped his toe. Indeed. And yet, the breaker switch lies in the opposite wing. He waited. Sir Reginald's face paled. Next, Poirot addressed Miss Harcourt. Miss Harcourt, you discovered the note and feather. Did you enter the library earlier that day? She squared her shoulders. I brought my aunt the afternoon post, then retired to the drawing room. I did not approach the library again until Sinclair summoned me. Thank you. Poirot's gaze lingered with polite intensity. And the candles, why do you think they burned lower than usual? Miss Harcourt grimaced. Perhaps someone let them gutter to obscure vision, or to create a mood of unease. Quite so, Poirot murmured. A ruse to prey on nerves. He paused, then turned to Edward. Monsieur Beaufort, earlier you professed unease at the thefts. But tell me, did you observe anyone in the hall just before the blackout? Edward swallowed hard. No, I was in the billiard room until the lights went out. Were you alone? Poirot pressed. Edward's voice faltered. Yes, alone. I heard a window latch click, and then the lights failed. Poirot's head tilted. Which window? Edward's eyes widened. The one overlooking the rose garden. Poirot's little grey cells whirred. He rose and addressed the company. Thank you all. You may rest for the night in the drawing room, with Mr. Thomas posted at the door. I shall retire to consider these statements and devise our next step. He bowed, then turned toward the door. As he departed, the guests exchanged uncertain glances, the crackle of the fire breaking the hush like distant thunder. In the silent aftermath, each wondered whether the very act of surrendering to Poirot's scrutiny would hasten the resolution, or bring the peril closer. Alone in the hallway, Poirot pressed a gloved hand to his chin and surveyed the darkened portraits lining the walls. The house seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere, hidden behind shuttered windows and locked doors, the mastermind of this cruel game prepared the next move. But Poirot, undaunted, felt only the thrill of the chase, and the certainty that each piece of evidence, each trembling statement, would guide him unerringly to the truth. Chapter 6, Psychology and Motives. Morning light filtered through heavy drapes in Poirot's guest suite, gilding the patterned carpet and illuminating the detective's thoughtful countenance. He sat at the small writing desk, blue-veined fingertips steepled beneath his chin, as the events of the preceding days swirled through his mind. The missing sapphire brooch, the vanished snuff box, the ominous note, the staged blackout, Lady Marian's collapse, each incident formed a piece of a complex puzzle. But it was not merely the physical evidence that occupied Poirot's little grey cells, it was the psychology behind each act, the hidden motives that drove human behavior. He recalled the lilac scent first detected in the salon, so improbable in an English country house. Someone had introduced it deliberately, an olfactory red herring to distract suspicion. Likewise, the two contrasting flower petals, a pale rose in the salon and a deep violet bloom beneath the window, spoke of deliberate misdirection. He had noted, too, the black feather in the library, its stem stiff and unfamiliar, as though dropped in haste after serving its purpose. Each tactile clue, subtle though it seemed, bore the imprint of intention. Poirot leaned back and reviewed his notes. The green silk thread found beneath the brooch display case did not belong to any household garment, the fabric was of Parisian quality, perhaps belonging to a tailor in Lady Marian's social circle. The single black hair, plucked from the carpet beneath the snuff-box case, indicated a stranger's involvement, someone with dark hair, certainly not the auburn locks of Lady Marian or the silver sheen of Sinclair. These threads of evidence, though disparate, hinted at an intruder with access and cunning. Yet Poirot knew that facts alone did not solve a mystery. It was the interplay of fear, greed, loyalty, and revenge that drove people to desperate acts. He considered each member of the household in turn. Edward Beaufort, the nephew, financially impecunious, yet respectful of his aunt's generosity. He had professed sorrow at the missing heirloom, but his shifting gaze and nervous twitch betrayed inner turmoil. Did he covet the brooch as a means to restore his fortunes? Or did he seek merely to frighten his aunt into revising her will? Then there was Miss Cecilia Harcourt, Lady Marian's cousin. Austere and proud, she flitted through the manor's corridors like a wraith, offering polite condolences yet maintaining a studied aloofness. She discovered the warning note and feather in the library, a note that addressed the second, seemingly threatening another assault. Was she the victim of someone's malevolence, or did she plant the note herself to heighten the drama and shift blame onto others? Reverend Smythe and Sir Reginald, the neighbours, they claimed to have been in the conservatory admiring orchids when the lights died. Yet if the blackout had been executed from the opposite wing, as the breaker panel suggested, it meant the culprit had traversed the house in darkness. Both men were familiar with the manor's layout, both had visited frequently. Could they have exploited their local knowledge to facilitate the thefts? Sinclair, the butler, appeared the model of propriety. His loyalty to Lady Marian seemed unwavering, yet the butler class often moved unnoticed and unremarked. He alone held master keys, he alone managed the household's secrets. His flawless demeanor never wavered, but Poirot recalled the faint scuff upon his shoe's heel, a mark of recent haste. Did he shuffle through corridors at odd hours? And he had been the one to discover the brooch's disappearance in the parlour, yet expressed no alarm when questioned. Poirot paused to sip his tea, its warmth grounding him. He turned to Lady Marian's writing desk and examined her correspondence. A fresh letter from Paris. Madame Leonide, the dressmaker, spoke of urgent fittings for an upcoming season. The dressmaker had entered the salon the evening of the theft but claimed to have been elsewhere. Her arrival might explain the green silk thread if she had draped a fabric sample there. But why would she steal? Perhaps she sought to ingratiate herself into the family's favor, or maybe she was taking orders from someone else. He retraced his footsteps to the corridor outside the library. Late at night, someone must have juggled the glass domes, silenced the alarms of the grandfather clock, and manipulated the electrical panel. Such boldness bespoke desperation or deep resentment. Resentment toward whom? Lady Marian had no direct enemies, at least none she acknowledged. Yet within families, unspoken grievances fester, old slights, inheritance disputes, unrequited affections. Hidden rivalries simmered beneath polished smiles. Poirot's eyes drifted to the portrait of Lady Marian's late husband, Harold, a gentle gentleman who had perished in India a decade earlier. The brood of relatives included Edward, the nephew whom Harold had favoured, Cecilia, a cousin who had lost her own inheritance, Reverend Smythe, who had once sought Lady Marian's philanthropic support. Each had motive by virtue of their dependence, disappointment, or ambition. But motive alone did not suffice. One needed opportunity and the cunning to enact such a multifaceted plan. He stacked his clues on the desk, the thread, the hair, the petals, the note, and the scrap of charred paper from the breaker board. Patiently, he aligned them by size and shape, like pieces of a mosaic. Then he closed his eyes, imagining the thief's path through the manor, entry through the salon window, swift removal of the brooch, deposit of the rose petal, retreat to a hiding place, later, entry to the library, lifting of the snuff box, placement of the feather and note, a circuit to the servants' wing to trip the switch, followed by the cruel spectacle of Lady Marian's collapse. The plan required intimate familiarity with the house. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. It was Sinclair, bearing Lady Marian's morning post and a tray of fruit. Poirot accepted them with his customary grace, slipping the letters aside. "Thank you, Sinclair. Pray, have you arranged for the analysis of the thread and hair back in London?" "Yes, sir," Sinclair replied. "Both specimens are en route to your trusted experts." "Excellent." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And have you spoken to the gardener regarding the removal of all lilac and wisteria?" Sinclair nodded. "It is done, Monsieur Poirot." "Very good. I trust you will keep the staff calm." He smiled faintly. "They serve you well, Sinclair, yet are unnerved by these disturbances. A servant's mind is suspicious by nature when proprieties are upset." "I shall maintain order, sir," the butler assured him, bowing respectfully. Left alone once more, Poirot gathered his little satchel and prepared to resume his inquiries. But before he could depart, Lady Marian entered, pale yet determined. She held out a small photograph. "Monsieur Poirot, I found this among my late husband's papers. It shows Harold and a friend, Captain Arrowsmith, who died in the Raj at the same time. Note the brooch Harold wears." Poirot examined the photograph, a sepia print depicting Harold clutching Lady Marian's hand, the sapphire brooch gleaming at his collar. Beside him stood a uniformed officer whose features were stern and intelligent. "Arrowsmith," Poirot mused. "I recall the name. He was close to Harold, perhaps even a rival for your affections." Lady Marian's lips trembled. They were brothers in arms. "I have no wish to tarnish his memory." "Nevertheless," Poirot said gently, "memories can twist, and old alliances can mask hidden resentments. Perhaps Captain Arrowsmith's family might harbor a claim upon your heirloom." Lady Marian's eyes widened. "My brother-in-law's widow? I have not thought to contact her." "A useful avenue," Poirot agreed. "In the meantime, I shall pursue mine here." He bowed. "Thank you for entrusting this to me." As Lady Marian withdrew, Poirot put on his coat and stepped into the corridor. His mind hummed with possibilities. The motives lay in desire for wealth, envy of position, longing to rekindle old bonds, and the instinct to frighten. Yet only one person could have orchestrated the sequence of theft, misdirection, and terror. Soon, the human motivations would reveal themselves as unmistakably as the traces of silk and feather. And when they did, Poirot would be ready to deliver justice in his inimitable fashion. Chapter 7, The Trap. That evening, a tense atmosphere settled over Amberley Manor. The drawing-room's gas lamps cast a mellow glow upon velvet drapes and polished mahogany. Lady Marian sat beneath the grand portrait of her late husband, clutching a small prayer book. The other guests assembled in a loose semicircle, Miss Cecilia Harcourt by the hearth, Edward Beaufort near the window, Reverend Smythe and Sir Reginald Pembroke upon a settee, and Sinclair standing discreetly behind the tea trolley. Poirot arrived last, carrying a simple wooden box beneath his arm. "Good evening, everyone," he proclaimed with his customary flourish, moustache twitching in polite anticipation. "Tonight, I propose a diversion, an entertainment worthy of Amberley's social gatherings." He placed the box upon a small side table. "A séance." A murmur ran through the assembly. Reverend Smythe cleared his throat. "A séance, monsieur? I confess I know little of such things." Poirot smiled. "Nor do I. But our dear Lady Marian, seeking comfort, has invited Madame Lucille, a medium visiting the county fete this weekend, to conduct tonight's séance. Madame Lucille will arrive in 10 minutes. Meanwhile, I ask that you each remain here, in the circle, without leaving the room." His eyes twinkled. "Do not be alarmed, it is merely a stage upon which we might observe certain phenomena." He opened the box to reveal a velvet cushion upon which gleamed the missing sapphire brooch. A hush fell. "Behold," he said softly, "the recovered heirloom." He lifted the dome from its case. "This very afternoon, I retrieved the brooch, concealed it within the false lining of an overcoat in the linen cupboard." He paused, letting the revelation settle. "But I ask that we pretend it is present for Madame Lucille, so as to lure our culprit into making a final error." Edward's eyes widened. "You mean to tempt the thief into taking it again?" "Exactly," Poirot replied, "for in the presence of witnesses, they will feel emboldened, or desperate." He replaced the brooch on the cushion and covered it with its glass dome. "Now, please form a circle around Madame Lucille's table." He gestured toward 2 chairs set before a small round table draped in black cloth. Lady Marian nodded, advancing to the head of the arrangement. Moments later, a tall woman in flowing dark robes entered, Madame Lucille, eyes hidden beneath a lace veil, hands adorned with silver rings. She inclined her head to each guest in turn, murmuring pleasantries in a hushed, reverent tone. Poirot introduced them by name and station, careful to note each reaction, the sudden tense tightening of Miss Harcourt's fingers, Sir Reginald's raised brow, Edward's pale lips. Once all had taken their places, Madame Lucille rang a slender bell 3 times. "Spirits of Amberley," she intoned, voice quavering, "we beseech you." The guests sat in silence, the only sound the grandfather clock ticking insistently from the corner. The gas lamps flickered as a draught brushed the curtains. Poirot watched that small movement intensely, an orchestration, perhaps, by hidden hands. After a moment's pause, Madame Lucille turned her palms upward. "Is there one among you who seeks to wrong another? Reveal yourself." She paused again, then sighed. "I sense guilt." Her veil lifted slightly as she peered into the circle. "You, nephew of the lady, your spirit trembles." Edward swallowed. "You are mistaken." He clenched his fists upon his knees. Before Madame Lucille could press further, Poirot stood. "Thank you, madam," he said quietly. "You have done much to soothe our fears." He offered her a curtsy. "But I must take over now." Madame Lucille bowed and retreated to a corner, where she remained silent. Poirot swept his gaze across the circle. "Ladies and gentlemen, the séance was but a pretext. I wished to watch you as you sat, to observe subtle gestures in the lamplight. Now, I propose a demonstration." He turned to Sinclair. "My dear Sinclair, would you remove the dome from the brooch for a moment?" Sinclair did so with impeccable composure, placing the glass dome upon the side table. Poirot patted the cushion, confirming the brooch was still there, then stepped aside. "Thank you, Sinclair. Now, all of you, keep your eyes upon the brooch, and do not divert your gaze." Silence fell. A moment passed. Then, from the far side of the room, a hand flicked upward, sending the brooch tumbling from its cushion. A collective gasp echoed as the sapphire flashed across the carpet. Poirot's little grey cells leapt to life. The hand belonged to Reverend Smythe. He recoiled, eyes wide with shock, as Edward sprang forward to catch the brooch. Sir Reginald rose with a cry. Sinclair advanced, face stern. Poirot raised a gloved hand. "Monsieur Smythe, please remain seated." His tone was gentle but unyielding. "I observed you lean forward, almost imperceptibly, before the brooch moved. And yet, you deny it." Reverend Smythe's face betrayed incredulity. "Monsieur Poirot." "I merely shifted in my chair." "As did others," Poirot agreed. "But your movement was distinct." Moreover, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a slender green silk thread. He held it aloft for all to see. "This thread fell from your waistcoat pocket as you rose." Gasps rippled through the circle. Smythe's cheeks flushed. He reached for his pocket, unwillingly produced a length of green silk, and stood as if trapped in a dream. I can explain." Poirot's sharp eyes rested upon Lady Marian. "Madam, have you ever seen this thread before?" Lady Marian leaned forward. "My seamstress in Paris uses no such material. I have never worn green silk." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "Monsieur Smythe, I found this same thread beneath the salon's display case the night the brooch vanished." He turned to Sinclair. "Retrieve the evidence envelopes, if you please." Sinclair produced 2 small packets, one containing the green thread from the salon, the other containing the thread just removed from Smythe's pocket. Poirot held them side by side. "Observe, the texture, the hue, the sheen are identical." Reverend Smythe's voice trembled. It must have fallen by accident. I visited the salon days ago, perhaps I brushed against the case." Poirot's slender fingers tapped his lips. "Days ago? Yet the thread remained undetected until this evening. Pray, tell us the truth, what brought you to Amberley Manor?" Smythe's shoulders sagged. He glanced at the others, defeated. "I am in dire need of funds," he admitted in a low voice. "My parish cannot sustain me, I have debts, and I saw the brooch displayed so temptingly. I thought, if I could obtain it, then return it before discovery, I might pose as the saviour who recovered it, earning Lady Marian's gratitude." A stunned hush enveloped the room. Even Miss Harcourt's austere composure broke into disbelief. Edward's hands trembled as he returned the brooch to Sinclair. Lady Marian covered her mouth, tears glittering in her eyes. Poirot's expression remained calm but resolute. "Your plan was clever," Poirot continued, "but imperfect. You failed to consider that the green silk thread would betray you, and that you might be tempted to seize the brooch again, even in the presence of witnesses. Your desperation overrode your caution." Reverend Smythe bowed his head. "I am ashamed." Poirot inclined his own head. "The brooch shall be returned to its rightful place. Dr. Wainwright will attend to you, and I trust Lady Marian will deal with you mercifully." He turned to the assembled guests. "I thank you all for your forbearance. The truth has emerged at last." As the butler moved to secure the brooch once more, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. The perfumed air, the shifting shadows, the tiny thread of green silk, all had guided him to the heart of the scheme. In this room, by gentle misdirection and precise observation, he had ensnared the culprit. Outside, the moon broke through parting clouds, silvering the manor's red brick facade. Within, calm was restored, justice served by the steady brilliance of Hercule Poirot's mind. Chapter 8, Denouement. The morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of Amberley Manor's drawing room, illuminating the polished mahogany and the fine Persian carpets with a gentle warmth. Outside, the Sussex Downs rolled in waves of green under a cloud-dappled sky, as if nothing untoward had ever occurred within the house's venerable walls. Inside, however, the atmosphere was one of hushed solemnity and relief. Lady Marian sat upright on the velvet settee, her composure restored, while Sinclair brought a teapot and delicate porcelain cups. Poirot stood before the grand portrait of her late husband, reviewing the facts one final time for the assembled company. "Madam," he began, inclining his head to Lady Marian, "I trust you are feeling stronger this morning." She offered a grateful smile. "Much better, monsieur. Your inquiries and my rest have been most restorative." "Excellent." Poirot turned to face the room. "Before I take my leave, I should like to summarize the sequence of events and the interplay of motives that led us to the recovery of both the sapphire brooch and the snuff box, as well as to the apprehension of the perpetrator." He paused to let them settle in their seats. Edward Beaufort stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. Miss Cecilia Harcourt rested a gloved hand upon the arm of her chair. Sir Reginald Pembroke and Reverend Smythe exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot's little grey cells gleamed with satisfaction as he recounted each clue in turn. First, the theft of the sapphire brooch from the private salon. The absence of forced entry and the presence of a pale rose petal upon the carpet indicated a deliberate misdirection. The strong scent of lilac, imported, as we discovered, served to confuse our sense of time and origin. Yet the single thread of Parisian green silk, found beneath the display case, pointed to someone whose attire incorporated such fine fabric. Poirot lifted the sealed envelope containing the thread. "This led us to Madame Leonide, your Parisian dressmaker, but her cooperation and lack of motive eliminated her. Instead, the false lead drew our attention away from the corridor where our true culprit trod." He seated himself upon a settee opposite Lady Marian, folding his hands. Next came the disappearance of the 18th century snuff box. Again, no sign of violence in the glass dome, but a single black hair fell to the carpet, hair we matched to Reverend Smythe's own dark locks. The evidence from the library was further compounded by the ominous note, "The second is for you," and the black feather, a device intended to instill dread, drawing on mythic associations of ill omen. Poirot tapped the envelopes laid out on the low table. The planned blackout, executed by tripping the servant's electrical breaker, escalated the atmosphere from theft to terror. When Lady Marian collapsed in the library, it was precisely the reaction the thief wanted, a diversion from the material thefts to a theatrical spectacle of supernatural menace. Reverend Smythe's head bowed. Poirot continued, Monsieur Smythe, you admitted that your financial situation had become desperate. Your parish could not support you, and your debts mounted. You contrived to remove the brooch, intending to return it later as a hero's gesture, thereby earning Lady Marian's gratitude, and a financial reward. When that plan stalled, you escalated matters to the snuff box, believing you might again effect a dramatic recovery. He paused briefly, allowing the gravity of the confession to settle. Your knowledge of Amberley Manor, acquired through your neighborly visits, allowed you to move unobserved. Yet your haste betrayed you, in the thread, the hair, and in your impulsive attempt at the séance diversion, where you reached for the brooch itself. Reverend Smythe looked up, eyes glistening. I meant no lasting harm, he whispered. I only sought to save my livelihood. Poirot inclined his head with measured compassion. Desperation is a powerful force, monsieur. Yet it does not excuse the breach of trust and the distress you caused. Dr. Wainwright will attend to your health, and the matter will be referred to the local magistrate. I have no doubt that Lady Marian's benevolence will temper justice with mercy. Lady Marian rose, approaching the trembling vicar. She placed a gentle hand upon his shoulder. Reverend Smythe, she said softly, you have served this parish faithfully. While your actions were wrong, I cannot condemn a man beset by misfortune. I will ensure your debts are cleared, on condition that you dedicate the next 5 years to charitable work among the poor. Tears glimmered in Reverend Smythe's eyes as he bowed his head in gratitude. Poirot allowed a small smile to grace his lips at this act of magnanimity. He resumed the summary. As for the decorative flourishes, the petals of pale rose and lilac, the black feather, and the charred paper from the breaker panel, these were not random. They formed a tapestry of psychological intimidation, designed to prey upon Lady Marian's known superstitions and to distract the household from the tangible evidence. Yet, by attending to each seemingly minor detail, we disentangled artifice from fact. Poirot turned to Sinclair. And you, Sinclair, by providing me with housekeeping records and observing the staff's comings and goings, were indispensable in narrowing the field of suspects. The butler inclined his head. It was my duty, sir. With gratitude, Poirot replied. Then he addressed Edward and Miss Harcourt. To you both, I offer my thanks for your patience under trying circumstances. I trust that the ordeal has not been too distressing. Edward managed a wry smile. I confess, monsieur, I felt relief rather more than fear. Miss Harcourt inclined her graceful head. Your method has been enlightening, Monsieur Poirot. Ah, but the enlightenment is mutual, Poirot said, rising. He moved to Lady Marian's side once more. Madam, the brooch and snuff box shall be returned to their rightful display cases this very morning. I take my leave with the satisfaction of knowing that order is restored to Amberley Manor, and that my little grey cells have done justice. Lady Marian offered him her gloved hand. Monsieur Poirot, you have my deepest gratitude. I dare say Amberley Manor has never known such excitement, nor such resolution. This, Poirot replied as he took her hand, is the delight of detection, to bring light where there was darkness, and peace where there was fear. May you enjoy many tranquil years ahead. With that, he gathered his satchel and made for the door. Sinclair bowed once more, and the assembled company followed him to the portico. Outside, the carriage awaited, the coachman's polished boots glinting on the gravel. Poirot paused on the threshold, one hand upon the door frame. He looked back at the fine lines of the manor, the faces of those he had gathered, and offered a final sentiment. Remember, Miss Amis, that in every human heart there lie both impulse and restraint. It is the work of the detective to discern which shall prevail. With a flourish of his coat, Hercule Poirot descended the steps and took his seat in the carriage. As it trundled away toward Chichester, he gazed back at Amberley Manor, its red brick walls aglow in the morning sun. Within, Lady Marian's household would resume its routines, enriched by the lessons of truth, mercy, and the indomitable power of observation. And so the mystery concluded, another testament to the unrivaled brilliance of Hercule Poirot's method, and to the reassuring triumph of justice and compassion over fear and deceit.